Good afternoon to everyone in Singapore and good morning to those joining us from any of the European time zones. This is the 14th session in our bi-monthly Singapore Declares and Shares series. In the way of a brief introduction, Construction Declares, now known as Built Environment Declares, is an online petition uniting all strands of construction in the built environment. It started in May 2019 and now has over 9,200 signatories in various disciplines and in 28 countries across the globe. The number of professionals engaged in the signatory companies is now over 1 million employees. My name is Richard Hessel. I'm an architect at Woha Architects, and in early January 2020, we and the other architects and engineers in Singapore joined the movement, and we made our declaration. And in June 2020, we set up this Singapore and Global Environment Consultants Declare platform. This means that any environmental consultant across the globe who wishes to join will be helped by us. About the same time, the Singapore Landscape Architects joined the declaration. We now have a total of 55 Singapore-based signatory companies. So on to today. Today is the 14th session, and we have two speakers, Martha Lewis from Copenhagen and Tina Perinotto from Sydney. I won't introduce them because I'm leaving that to Carlos, who will come in soon, but our speakers will share insights on chemicals in the materials we specify and use in our industry, on best ways to communicate issues relating to sustainability and the built environment. Carlos Banon has kindly accepted to moderate today's session. Carlos is an architect and professor specializing in digital design and sustainable manufacturing methods. He's a recipient of the President's Design Award in Singapore, the highest distinction for designs and designers in the country. Over to you, Carlos.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for the nice introduction, and it's a pleasure for me to host this 14th edition of Construction Declares. So I'm glad to have amazing panelists today. We have Martha Lewis, we have Tina Perinotto. So I'm going to start introducing Martha first. So Martha Lewis is head of materials and Henry Larson, where she established an office-wide material database identifying healthy, ethical, and environmental sustainable materials. Currently, she represents the Danish Association of Architectural Firms in the CEN 350 committee, establishing circularity standards. And in 2019, she received the Denmark Building Green's Sustainable Element Person of the Year prize. Amazing. So over to you, Martha. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I have a spiel for you on chemicals, and I want to start out with just giving some terminology, because does everyone know what novel entities are? It seems to me like something that you might be excited to get as a present, but in reality, novel entities are one of the 9 planetary boundaries, and actually one of the 6 where there's very clear data that we are overstepping this boundary. Novel entities, when you unpack this present, it means that these are new chemicals in a geological sense. So substances that are not part of the natural strata of our planet. And this includes microplastic, this includes synthetically manufactured chemicals, and it also includes heavy metals that are used in human processes. So essentially things that you don't really want to unwrap as a package. And why is this relevant for the building industry? It's relevant for 2 reasons. One of them is that we've had an explosive expansion of the use of global chemicals. And looking at this current decade, there's an expectation that usage will double. Part of this is that petrochemical companies are looking for new markets and expanding in the chemical industry. For the construction sector, this is highly relevant because the construction sector is the #1 end market for the consumption of global chemical production, consuming 28%. And if we look at other aspects of pollution, Plastics. Again, I give this presentation from a very Eurocentric point of view. I have some data from North America, but primarily there's very little global data, but the data I do have is European. So in terms of plastics, the construction sector consumes nearly 20% of the plastics that are used in the EU. And other impacts in terms of pollution, everyone is well aware of the construction waste that's generated on an annual basis. The estimate for the year 2025 is over 1 billion tons of waste. And this is including hazardous waste and problematic substances and very specifically heavy metals. Looking at our oceans, we have a 58% of the microplastic leakage in the oceans is from paint. There's a very interesting study that came out at the beginning of this year about paints, looking at all 6 sectors, including the built environment sector, architectural paints. And the conclusions are fairly dire that within the paint sector, and specifically in our own sector, there's a lot that we can do in order to make changes. So what exactly are those changes, and how do we start challenging this rather conservative, risk-adverse industry that we all work in? And before I start off with the positive solutions, I have to raise my finger and say one thing, and that is that certification of buildings is not really helping us on the hazardous chemical subject, because the certification systems are simply not adequate. The requirements that are within the systems are not producing the proper requirements and the proper list of how do we go about screening our building projects. So for example, if we take a look at hazardous chemical usage in building products in Denmark in the year 2017, there's a little bit under 20,000 tons of substances of very high concern that have been reported, documented use in construction products. And of this 20,000 tons, only, if you did a DGNB screening, only 3% would be conceivably caught by a DGNB screening. And the other 97% is not screened for in a DGNB, even at the platinum level. And the same situation in Finland with the LEED. I think this was LEED 4.0 that I looked at. In Finland with BREEAM UK, there's no screening for hazardous chemicals. In Norway, again, the orange indicates what you conceivably could screen for in terms of the amounts. So in Norway, we're also around about a 3% target rate. These are really low, but there is one good story out there, and that is Sweden. Because of the way that Sweden, in BREEAM SE and also in other certification systems for buildings in Sweden, because of the way that they formulate the requirements, there is a much higher possibility to actually catch these and keep them out of your building project. So what are the Swedes doing? This is fairly interesting. We should learn from the Swedes here. And what the Swedes do is, instead of working like all the other systems with very long lists of hazardous substances, the Swedes take another angle. And the requirements are formulated like this. This is the entire requirement, for example, for screening for hazardous substances in BREEAM SE. On the left, they're looking at eliminating substances in products based on their properties. So instead of saying we don't want all of these particular chemicals, you say we don't want these particular characteristics. We do not want carcinogenic, mutagenic, toxic to reproduction, endocrine disruptors, et cetera, and you work from this point of view. It's much more effective. It covers a much broader palette of the hazardous substances that are out there, and it's much less susceptible to changes in regulation, because you've already dictated, okay, we won't have these carcinogenic, mutagenic, and reprotoxic substances. On the right, you have like a second level of priority where you have the characteristics that are perhaps a little bit less problematic than on the left. These are called the risk reduction properties. So here we're looking at things that are fatal if inhaled or fatal in contact with skin, etc. So this approach is something that I highly recommend because designers have the possibility to make huge change based on the products they're selecting and based on the criteria they use for screening and for eliminating substances in building products based on characterizations. But in order to do that, you really need the data. What is in the product? Because unless you can see that there are carcinogenic characterizations in your products, then you don't have a chance of keeping them out of the project. So we're highly dependent on product declarations. And I have 3 of them here. There's the US one, the Health Product Declaration, which where you can see on the left here with the orange, you can see the list of ingredients, and also the hazard phrases are listed. The Swedish Swedish declaration has been in existence for over 25 years, so they have a very solid basis for being able to establish criteria that point to, let's keep the hazard phrases out of our building products. And then you could also get some support from the Declare label. So material passes, building product declarations are essential for our next step in order to really have projects that do minimize hazardous substances that are problematic for both human health, but also for the environment. I would like to point you in the direction of a very interesting report that the Green Science Policy Institute came out with about PFAS, parent-polyacryl fluoroacryl substances in building products. And these forever chemicals are in many, many different building products. And I don't have time to say much more than this, but this report is extraordinarily useful, including an appendix at the end, which lists the CAS numbers of a lot of the problematic substances, but also describes in each segment on roofing, on coatings, flooring, etc., exactly what is the issue and how can you make smarter alternative choices. So back to this question about paints, this study that came out from Switzerland at the beginning of the year. Architectural paints contribute to 48% of global paint-related plastic pollution. And if you look at this lovely Sankey diagram, you can see that at the bottom on the right here, architectural paints, and now I'm talking about plastic polymer-based paints, contribute to 33% of, or 33% of architectural paints are leaked into water or land. This is highly problematic. So if you want a simple, what can I possibly do to make change? Change the kind of paint you use. Change it to paints that are not plastic polymer based, but change to mineral and organic paints that do not have a plastic content. So look at linseed oil, look at clay, look at lime, and look at silicate paint. And that would be the one thing if you take away from the message today, change your paints. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Amazing presentation, very insightful. So much information here that probably we didn't know before. Thanks for sharing that, Marta, with us. We will have time later to talk about it in more depth. And now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Tina Perinotto, who is the managing editor, publisher, and founder of The Fifth State, an online newspaper for green buildings and sustainable cities. It was established in 2009. The publication has become essential reading for business people, investors, designers, consultants, government officials, and politicians working towards a more sustainable built environment. So the Fifth State holds thought leadership and interactive events designed to stimulate faster sustainable transformation in our built environments. So please, Tina, go ahead, floor is yours.
Well, hello. Thank you very much for this. It's a fantastic opportunity. Thanks, Carlos, for the intro, and great presentation from Martha. And it's really interesting. It's chemicals and pollution that got me into this whole environmental movement in the first place. You know, probably for a lot of people, but very interesting. And I'm about to paint my house, so I will take big note of that, of what you said, Martha, about the paints. And I really like that idea. So I'll share my screen. I think it's a full screen now. So basically, great. So we started the Fifth Estate in 2009. So I'll just give you a bit of background, because I just thought it'd be helpful to frame this presentation in terms of, you know, how to get your story in the Fifth Estate, because we started the whole idea off as a way to create a hub for people to share information. You know, being a journalist, I believe that the fast exchange of information is the best way to do anything, to change, to learn, to all sorts of things. So my background was I was a writer on the Financial Review for 6 years, and before that the Property Council for another 6 years, where I edited a magazine, you know, sort of kind of a bit of an upmarket thing. And I kind of got the idea and learning over those years about what makes people click and what gets them excited, and how do you create change, because I guess I always had an agenda, which is about the environmental the environment and sustainability. I was always very interested in that, like a lot of people are deep down. I grew up in the country, so that was my thing. So 2009, the reason we got going is because I was at an event that was run by Carolyn Pidcock, actually. It was the number of things, and I always wanted to do it, but the thing that the catalyst really was this event where there were a whole lot of architects and small developers and contributors and consultants are all doing amazing work on sustainability, and there was no one telling their story. And I thought, wow, this needs to happen. So of course, when there's a GFC and a major recession, that's when you start a publication, isn't it? So I called it that. So this is I'll give you a bit of a look at what we do. This is our front page from early this morning. It's now changed. So we cover a range of issues. You can see there's a story called Density is not a dirty word. So we've got a lot of ethical issues we deal with, but I'll go into that a little bit more later. We've got a story on robots. Are they going to steal your job? So we talk about construction and a whole lot of things. So this is what it looks like below the fold. So you've got the front page up the top. It's very hard to get it all in the same page because of the shape of our website, which is obviously long. So that's another story. So Spinifex, this is the bit that is below the fold, so you know, down from the front page, I'll call it. So this is Spinifex, and this is really created as a hub for the industry to express its views. So we ask for people to share their thoughts, and it needs to be a kind of call to action to industry or government. So what are your views that, you know, and we called it Spinifex because the Fifth Estate, really, the idea for it came when I was on a long trek on the Larapinta in the centre of Australia, and it was very hot and arid, and I thought, oh my God, we so need a publication to talk about how to survive climate change. And in the middle of Australia, you see all this Spinifex, and it's considered a bit of a pest. It's spiky grass, it's hard to touch, you can't walk on it or touch it, and it's everywhere, and it's rolling around the countryside. So I like the metaphor of that, because somebody said to me, it has another function. It actually holds the topsoil together. So I thought, that's great. That's what we'll call our section for the op-ed. It's about you, our readers, and, you know, what you want to contribute. I want it to be spiky and annoying, but also very useful because it holds the topsoil together. So that's our metaphor. And in the early days, our site was plastered with all my photos from the outback. I loved it so much. And I kept going back there year after year. So that's a bit about that. And then kind of what we look for. So this is the physical shape that we look for. It's in a place for opinions, calls to action, government, to industry, government or community. We look for 700 plus words. We don't allow self-promotion, except perhaps academics when they're discussing the results of their survey or research. And we don't like footnotes, just embedded links, just a big warning. We really dislike footnotes. They're really annoying. Okay, so then This is another part of our site. Sorry, it's a little bit over the place because that's what journalists are like a bit, actually, not as ordered as Martha with a narrative. It's kind of, you know, we go all over the place looking at what's interesting. So density, this is our trending stories from yesterday. So that's the density story. That's obviously one that attracted a lot of attention because it's about planning and zoning, and that really gets people excited in Australia. But Sydney in particular, we have some very special issues around planning here and zoning. The other one is, will robots steal our jobs? And this is interesting, 82% of job seekers want to work fighting climate change. So I love that kind of stuff. Then we write about jobs and what's happening in the sustainability industry as well. That's kind of a bit of a gossipy thing, rounding up the trends, who's hiring and why they're hiring people. Are they growing in this particular business or that? Locationally, we look at that as well. So that's a really kind of a fun thing because you get to know what the industry is really doing and where it's growing. Simple home renovations, that's really interesting because that's actually an old story and people have found it in our archives, and we've got, well, I think about 15,000 stories now, and they're bringing it up to the top, which is really interesting. It shows you what people want to read. And Nikola Tesla, this one just does not go away. It's unbelievable. So we had a contributor to Spinifex that wrote about Nikola Tesla, and it's been there at the near the top or at the top for about 4 years now since we published it. It's a bit annoying actually, but it's good for the numbers. And our numbers, by the way, is 60,000 unique visitors a month on average, but they can spike up to 70, 80, and even we got over 100,000 when we were writing about the drought. And the big story that we broke actually was that there were 90 towns in New South Wales a few years ago that were on the point of being closed down and being evacuated. And I think it rained the next week. They were going to make the decision. And of course, the council, the government people who are in charge of this refused to confirm or deny that they were looking at that. In fact, they denied it. But the person they put in charge was someone ex-defence whose previous job was in charge of strategic evacuation. So that was interesting. Oh yeah, and there was a story on Australian energy icon Alan Pearce, who I interviewed for a podcast, and he's just fantastic. Alan, he's just got such a big story. We also do events and ebooks. So pretty well, maybe we're masochists, but every time we do an event, we also do an ebook, which is, you know, the copy, the writing is fine. You know, we can get stories done, no problem. You know, give us a couple of weeks and we can round up a massive amount of content. But getting them into a beautiful ebook is really difficult. It's all the fiddly stuff, you know. It must be from the days that I used to actually edit a magazine and just loved it to death. And I really think that's the best form of media. It's my favourite. But here we are reproducing it online, and we cover these topics, you know, and build them out. So this is the next book coming up called Extreme Green Buildings, and that's lots of fun. That was seed funded by the former Department of Industry, now called DECU, which is climate change and energy efficiency and water, etc. One of those. And also Built, who's a builder here. So that's actually under construction at the moment. Another one was Moonshot, which is based on an event about the technology for eco buildings. So, you know, kind of eco prop tech, I suppose. This one was a book about the Well Institute. And here was Happy Healthy Offices. We did another one on circular economy. We did one on Flick the Switch, that's on electrification. That's a very big thing. And then our Tomorrowland event, which is coming up again in 1st of December. And we have a different theme for that. So this one 2 years ago, because of COVID interrupted us, and didn't have it. That was I, Human, about the human side of technology and where we're going with robots and flying machines, etc. We've done stories on education and how they're changing it. In fact, we're actually moved into the campus of UTS, University of Technology, Sydney, and we're here for 6 months to kind of get to know the universities and the universities and how what they're doing in research and education, because as far as I can see, the world desperately needs to educate itself and learn and train of how to transition to a low carbon economy and also a nature positive economy or world. And a lot of people have got no idea how to do it. There's been people in this industry for 10 or 15 years that are highly skilled, but the rest of the world is now starting to come online and they don't know how to do it. It's very interesting. People being hired as a head of ESG, probably loads of money, and they'd have no idea what they're doing, because they say, Tina, I don't know what, I've got no idea about ESG, but I'm here as the director because no one else can do it. Yeah, so that's some of the ideas that we have. And what have I done there? So there's even more books, so they go right back to some early days. I think I'm nearly out of time. Podcasts. So we do a lot of podcasts on different people. Great one on Tyson Yunkaporta, very challenging. He's an interesting, a very interesting guy. That's the front page. So a little about why we launched. Basically, as I said, there was a need. So many people doing great work, hardly anyone covering it. And also it was a way to motivate change. So I realised with my work at the AFR and the Property Council that if you talk about great things that other people are doing, guess what? Other people get a little bit envious and they want to be in the pages too. So I thought this is a great motivational way to be, you know, we're part newspaper, part activist, I suppose. It's true. The strategies. So basically we look for compelling stories, that things that business needs to know. So as you probably gathered, we're a business publication. So we need to have stories in there that are about success or knowledge or fear, you know, greed and fear, two big drivers. But, you know, what do they need to know about legislation, opportunities, etc. And the hub, which I've already talked about, and financial strategy, that's probably last. We're not very good on that. We're really about building brand, and we hope that we can survive. But we've been here 14 years. We've been here 14 years. And, oh, here's a question. Why isn't the topic of climate change brought up by the mainstream media? Good question. However, the mainstream media is really used to be very lean on covering anything to do with climate change and sustainability, but now they're really getting into it. I see more and more coverage everywhere. Climate change is still a strange topic for people. There's apparently still 9% of people, according to a survey recently done by the Museum of Sydney, that still are climate deniers, which is amazing considering Australia's about to have 4 straight years of climate impact, floods, fire, floods again, etc. after drought, by the way, not even counting the drought. So people are a little bit climate deniers, but I think everyone pretty well gets that we have to do it. Maybe looking at the scary part of it about the impact does freak people out a bit. And I think newspapers are a little bit concerned about that. The mainstream media is. So, but they talk about coal diminishing. They talk about renewable energy. The Financial Review is very happy to talk about all that these days. So if people want to get into the fifth estate, I just say familiarise with yourself with our mission. So our mission is actually to fast track sustainable change in the built environment. So 80% of our work is around the built environment, and the rest is about the context. So politics, policies. We cover a lot of things. Some of the ones that we've done is biophilia. You've got a pretty good idea from there. We do a lot on zoning as well, because we're about social sustainability as well. And what we like to publish, we like to be first. And if we can't be first, we have to be at least equal first. I always say we're needy and greedy. We want the best because we're tiny. We've got to work harder. What we don't like to publish is anything that promotes fossil fuels. And we've actually knocked back money from people like gas company that might want to put in there that they're sort of a transition fuel or something. We don't care if they're a transition fuel. We're not here to promote them or make them look good. And I think they realise that we've actually kind of got into, some interesting situations over that. And we're all about what motivates people to take up the fight. And, I think dangle some dollars in front of people, and that's a great motivator. Here's our niche. So 3-legged stool of sustainability, ESG, environmental social governance, built environment contributes to those goals, new economic models that deliver those, including investment, social affordable housing, alternative housing models that are sustainable, technology, data, and then how that contributes, energy, electric cars, etc. Although you've got to be careful with electric cars, they're still going to take a lot of embodied carbon. Of course, they're going to be better than fossil fuels, but cars are by themselves problematic, I think. Investment, ESG, and nature positive, which is the new kid on the block, and they're saying that that's going to be far more disruptive than net zero, because the big investors are starting to get concerned now about our diminishing environment, and that 50% of the world's GDP comes from the environment. So they're getting worried, and they're starting to demand that their portfolios that they invest in show whether not just that they're minimizing the impact on nature, but actually benefiting it. And what else have we got here? So I'm just looking at questions while I speak, and I think that's about it. I think that, yeah, that's just another picture. That's our sister site, the Green List, which is actually a directory of goods and services. Thanks, Carlos. Over to you.
Well, thanks, Tina. Thanks, Tina, for fantastic presentation. Again, covered a lot of ground, and I think it was very deep in a way that you explained the amazing work you're doing in your media platform. So thanks for sharing that with us. Already got the interest from the audience sharing questions in the Q&A window. So I encourage our participants today to write the questions if they have a particular question for any of our panelists, or a general question that we can address here today. And I think maybe just to kickstart a bit of our conversation, right? Our both presentations and both fields that you covered, I think, are actually really related in many ways, of course, from different sides. I mean, of course, the communication is needed to create the awareness to know more about the hazardous novel entities and plastics and toxic elements that most people maybe don't know, right? And most times, even underneath this veneer of innovation and promises of novelty, you know, some companies really mask the supply chains and create this kind of truth squads that somehow reshape conversations through media. So that's why also I think media is quite important, right? So so in the end, that led to probably, in my opinion, one of the most successfully toxic material transformations in the modern history, like the change that we are in right now. So my question maybe to both of you, but maybe at the beginning I will start with Tina, is about how can you spot those like truth squads or people that wants to publish or try to upsell their products or their ideas with you know, as a way to clean their image or to create a certain impression of a product that is not actually good?
Well, I mean, that's increasingly a really major problem is greenwashing.
Yeah.
And so this is happening because people can see the writing on the wall that we need to transition our economy. So from what I can perceive is that the marketing people that are very, very clever, they do pick the best and pay them the most. So marketing people and spin merchants, which are kind of aligned to journalists, I suppose, the other side of the deck, they're very, very clever, and they go, oh, the antennas are hypersensitive, and they go, oh, hang on a minute, we need to show that we're green. So they start promoting that they're green without having the backing of being green. And you're also dealing with complex companies that are sometimes very big. So they might be doing something terrible on one side, but they want to look green, and they start to say, well, we want to transition. You're seeing that with energy companies in Australia, saying we're getting out of fossil fuels. We promise you we are. And that's the start. You know, I think it's good, you know, ACCC, the Australian Consumer and Competition Commission, has now started to ping the companies that are, especially investors, are saying that they're green, but they're still investing in fossil fuels. There's really complex arguments. There's not a clear answer in this, because some people are saying you need to be inside the tent to change it. So even divesting of fossil fuels may not work, because if you're in there, you can actually start to vote against actions. I'm not really keen on that one, but I think we just have to shine a light on the good stuff and shine a light on the bad stuff as well. It's just it's an ongoing problem, and it's part of this transition. You know, we also say to ourselves, none of us is pure green. Who amongst us is actually a perfect citizen that, you know, doesn't have an impact on the earth, and a negative one? So we have to sort of try and say, let's bring everyone with us as fast as possible.
Yeah, I understand. I agree. I think it's true. I mean, it's difficult to address this problem every time that we are, from the design point of view, from different sides. All the layers of it is actually quite complex, right? I think also, Martha, from your point of view, that you know that most of those elements that are not checked, not even screened, right? So we are a bit blind in this industry. We somehow, if we don't check everything that we use in our buildings, definitely we are doing something that probably is not going to contribute positively. It's going to create a hazard. So on that sense, how do you see the perspective right now? And how can we navigate this very conservative and change-resistant industry in which we are?
Yeah, we have a lot of challenges. I think that this also overlaps with a question in the chat that is very direct. Why are we still using paints? And I think that the how do we do this is education. I hope that everyone listened today who didn't know that about the leakage of paint and the share of microplastic in the ocean. It registers. It's not a story that you can forget. So I think that, again, communications and getting the story out and educating people is highly relevant. And this is extraordinarily important. I think that it is really interesting that you put together this combi with chemicals and communications, because particularly for our industry, I'm not a chemist, it's really important to communicate highly complex information out to people who perhaps don't know how to pronounce the names of the substances. And that's not what it's about. It's about trying to find ways to communicate the problem, and then to give enough background support. You know, what do we have in regulation, or what do we have in the way we can look into our products? What do we have in terms of material passes? What kind of information can we educate consultants with, so that they are simply better clad to seriously address this in their specifications?
Can I just say that I am absolutely gobsmacked by your presentation, Martha, and you can bet that we'll be writing about it, because, as I say, it was the original thing that got me into an environmental thing, and it's kind of like being sidelined. And it's appalling because, you know, every time you look into and I had no idea about paints. So I can promise you that we're going to be writing about these things. And, you know, at least in Australia, I know we're being read by the industry, so we can actually try and make a difference. It's amazing what you're saying.
I think communication is incredibly important. So great that you're going to come with the stories and to pull out some of this very interesting research that's happening with paints, but there's also very interesting work coming from the GOES Institute linking the impacts of these chemicals on oceans and the relation to global warming. So I have all sorts of good tidbits for you, because there are really some really interesting, very interesting research that doesn't have the exposure that it should have, and we need to have more exposure, because if there was, I simply really do firmly believe that there was something more sharing of these, that people would have more impetus to make a difference in their specifications.
Yeah, I think it's amazing the way things go in trends. So, you know, we think we get green buildings, we've got 6-star buildings, we've got electrification being a big thing, and it's happening, and everyone focuses on that. And you forget about this other big issue that hasn't even been touched, really. It's incredible. But, you know, very, very concerning. So, you know, all the focus, it's like a fashion, you know, sometimes it worries me.
Yes.
Another aspect of communication is the more internal one within our sector. How do we communicate this very complicated information to other consultants? It's one thing to say, okay, paints, that was a very simple piece of advice. The first part of my recommendations are more complex. And one of the things that I've just recently been looking at is how, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the construction material pyramid. That is a very effective way of communicating CO2 impacts of building materials. So it's like the food pyramid, where the recommendations are eat, what you're building eats should be from the bottom of the pyramid, and then the stuff at the top is only your Friday candy, that kind of thing. But it conveys very highly complex information, data that comes out of the environment, the EPDs, the environmental product declarations, in a really graphic way, which is the way you can talk to architects. So architects can quickly see, okay, wow, that stuff at the bottom is something we should really perhaps look at, this insulation product, as opposed to looking at the rock wall or the glass wall, because we have significantly lower impacts here. What we're trying to do with chemicals is make a layer on this very easily communicative pyramid and say, can we put another filter of information, and that is the hazardous chemicals, and connect them to building products. So we're working on this because I think that these, they don't give you the whole answer, but they certainly give you enough of a sense of, hey, I can make a difference. And if you're given enough and interested enough, and you can understand, in my specification, I could actually limit the amount of hazardous chemicals that come out for example, in a circularity focus, when we're trying to design for disassembly, when we're trying to have our products have longer lives and lives in various different future products, or we're trying to optimize the future resource potential. These hazardous substances are really important to have an understanding of what are their impacts in the next life. So we're working on this pyramid because I think that we need more easy ways to communicate.
Martha, there was several years ago, came into, actually was at a conference in America with William McDonough, and he had this, and what you presented today reminded me that he said, instead of trying to, exactly what you said, instead of trying to ban all these chemicals, make the door handle safe for a child to touch, and to, make it safe for a child of 6. And you're pretty well, and I think that imagery is what we've got to bring back. And the Living Building Challenge has those list of red chemicals, but their challenge is so difficult. I don't hear a lot of people doing it. Yes. It just doesn't, it's all about energy at the moment, and or we're worried about the carbon, of course, and so people have kind of put aside the focus on chemicals, and yet they could be killing us too.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point you bring up, because we've had a lot of focus, and it's very easy to be concerned about the users of the projects, the children, the pregnant women, and also the workers who sit and breathe the air. So there's been so much focus on what's happening in the user space. There's also been regulatory-wise a lot of focus on worker safety. So in the building construction phase, there's a lot of focus. But what I think we need to have more focus on is what happens in the other life cycle phases. So in the production phase of some of these base chemicals that are used in our products, we actually have a very difficult impact in terms of social environmental justice with the production of a lot of the building block chemicals that are in, very often the production of this is in poverty laden neighborhoods, people of color. There's a huge negative impact at the very beginning in a lot of our upstream processes. We need to have more focus on that, as well as at the other end. So the circularity, we don't even have a lot of data for what do these substances that perhaps in the production phase are problematic, are they problematic at the end of life? We have data about are they problematic as a waste item, but we don't have good data about are they problematic if you want to reuse this item. So we have to expand that life cycle that we're looking at to include more than the 6-year-old in the handle on the door, and the construction worker who is spreading out something very sticky on the floor. So we go a little bit before and a lot after.
Yeah, I think definitely we need to expand the data we work with, and I think also to make it accessible to many more stakeholders, designers, or different developers, to really create that education and culture that you mentioned before, right? So I'm gonna pick up a couple of questions from the audience. I mean, related to the paint, which is actually one of the big problems that was portrayed here. So first question is like, if the paint manufacturers are aware of what they're doing, and if they are they still doing so? And then also, if you could give some other examples of other hazardous substances that we are commonly used in our designs.
Yeah, as far as the awareness of the paint manufacturers, I would say that this report from the Environmental Action Research Group in Switzerland was a bit of a bombshell, because until this came out, the assumed culprit for microplastics in waterways and ocean was tires, car tires, and textiles. And this just turned that on the head, and so then now it's actually not the case, it's paint. So of course this is new information, and the first reaction from paint industry as well, we need to see a couple more studies on this in order to have this backed up, which is always difficult, but perhaps the most logical way to go forward. If you're a paint manufacturer, you can't react too quickly.
Yeah.
Consultants, on the other hand, can react quickly and say, this is a conceivable problem. We could, just while we're waiting for these other studies, switch to some paints that we know don't have this problem. Yeah, so that about the paint manufacturers. It's very tricky when you are attacking a company's source of revenue.
And do you think
we have some very tricky problems out there?
I understand. Absolutely. I think that's really a good point, that consultants in the end have the choice, to choose the kind of product, and then somehow start banning those that are not in the right path, right? So I wonder also if those products that are produced right now, and somehow we start adopting these new products, these new, let's say, paints that are elaborated with oil, silicate, clay, lime, like really moving forward, if the old paint is gonna somehow be used in different contexts where they don't have maybe the choice, they just do whatever they have around, right? So maybe I still think that probably we're gonna solve the problem somewhere, but somewhere else will be probably continue, because they're gonna dump all these paints that are produced somehow in some place that they don't control, right? So
yeah, again, we're back to this very conservative industry, and the industry has gotten very used to many of the developments, let's say post-World War II in the last century, that utilized chemicals to make building processes faster and therefore cheaper, because time is money. So if you can have a drying rate that's faster, you have an accelerator. So a lot of what seemed like optimizations and a very progressive thinking in the 50s in order to get things to be faster and easier, and to spread better, and to have higher qualities, and to make it easier for the workers and all this. It seems that we're now caught by this trend, but that trend has really it's got a really strong hold on the industry, because this is our build as usual, and it's so hard to challenge that. It's so hard to say, okay, the linseed oil paint is what we used historically, but yeah, it takes longer, and their drying times are longer, and you have to do more layers, and you have to have an ideal weather situation in order to apply it on the exterior. So it costs more in that sense, and it's very hard to throw optimization away and say, well, because we're actually destroying the planet upon which humanity is dependent, we should maybe reevaluate. Again, we are addressing the issue of economy and how we work in a growth economy with limited resources on our planet.
Martha,
which one should we be using?
Yeah, Martha, I was going to ask you if you could elaborate on what you said about, that these chemicals are not considered in the certifications much.
I think that this is really one of the scariest points, because many of the certifications in their requirements, and it's actually very time consuming for consultants to, for example, you mentioned the Living Building Challenge, the red list, to pull that up, and the older version, I haven't been in, the older version had 845 different chemicals listed in an Excel sheet, and to screen every product for that. It's important, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I just think that the way the Living Building Challenge goes about making their requirements with this long list is not the right way, because they're actually missing a lot of the problematic substances. Because even though you think 840 something is a huge number, and of course it must be 100%. Well, it's not. I mean, I did a short study in Denmark based on what was used. It looks like if you use the criteria from Living Building Challenge, you would cover a little bit more than between 60 and 70% of the hazardous chemicals that are used in building products in Denmark, produced in Denmark, I should say. So you, on the one hand, get a false impression that you're doing a huge thing because you're using so much time on it. But we need to have a reassessment of how we actually screen for hazardous substances. And we need to really learn from the Swedes and use these problematic properties and screen for those. That's, of course, easily said and harder to do. For example, the PFAS. In terms of other hazardous substances, I really do want to point to PFAS. That was also a question from the audience. That PFAS is it is in so many different building products, building categories, components, and there are so many different substances that are para and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So there's a very long list of CAS substances. And I think possibly the worst is that they are very often used under the 0.1% declaration limit for example, REACH, the European chemical regulations for classification, labeling, and packaging. So if you have a paint, and paint uses PFAS in order to make it more spreadable and to make the cohesion of each drop be more workable. So you may not necessarily, even if you have a declaration, you wouldn't necessarily know there was PFAS in it. This is where we have huge issues, because we need to eliminate PFAS substances from all building products as soon as possible, so that consultants don't have to do screening. But how do we, Tina, how do we communicate this so that we can get enough awareness? People are driven to want to do this.
Well, you know,
can you do it with stories?
Yeah, we have to do a whole lot of stories on this. I'm really energized by this challenge.
Yeah,
absolutely. And you find, you find heroes that are doing great work, and you praise them, and then you sort of, talk about, and we have done quite a bit of chemicals in the past, but I've got to say that the energy question has kind of started to dominate everything, because our planet is warming so fast, and because, we are well beyond our capacity to survive, and we're heading to 3 degrees, if not more, I hate to think. But so that's become the urgent thing, and the danger is that we forget everything else. It's terrible. But we just need examples of great work. We need to keep pounding on this, and we need to go and ask the people who are doing the certifications, why are you not including some stronger sort of screening for PFAS, because PFAS is a terrible thing. And also perhaps a bit of a focus on what can eliminate some of these chemicals. We're looking at the most incredible properties that mycelium has. I was reading a story the other day that it can break down petrol and other terrible contaminants that we don't have any other answers for. I mean, this might be the magic mushrooms, yes. Perhaps, we've got to sort of focus on the solutions as well to give people hope, but also how hard is it to eliminate PFAS? Why are you saying that they're in all the paints or in most paints?
I don't know the degree of how, I can't put a number on that. I haven't seen numbers on that, but they are in a lot of paints for the spreadability.
And we need to nominate them and say, these paints, this brand has PFAS, this one doesn't, and just make it available for people to see.
Like the PVC free label, I think we need a PFAS free paint sticker very quickly. But I also think that we need to be politically active as consultants, as architects and engineers, we need to push regulation. And we do need to do our part in pushing certifications, but we also need to look on a political level, which is why Architects Declare is such an interesting organization in all the different countries. Some of them are more active than others on a regulatory prodding to get very specifically climate change legislation. But I think we need to expand perhaps the focus of Architects Declare also to hazardous substances, and to really begin to push on bans on PFAS very specifically.
Yeah, well, we now have blockchain. Yeah, so the big thing at the moment is, low embodied, we've got low operational energy. Everyone thinks that, the top part of this industry in Australia certainly thinks it's pretty clever at that. And Australia's got some really sort of high achieving, sort of skills in low operational energy. And now everyone's turning their attention to embodied carbon. And so we're using blockchain to measure the amount of carbon in the materials, where they're coming from, with their sources. With that kind of technology now, we should be able perhaps to turn it to the attention of PFAS and other chemicals. Do you think that's a possibility?
Blockchain is really very useful in terms of tracking upstream inputs. Really very helpful. We just need to move forward with a few more digitalized tools, and these product passports are extremely essential, so we have more knowledge. And
I agree with you, we need more regulations. And there's a horror, sort of regulation of any sort. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in Australia, it's like it's all about voluntary commitments, which I just think is so weak. And we would get there if we had another 50 years through voluntary measures, but we don't. And so we do need to push the regulation, and we've got people that deliberately try and hold it back all the time. So through our publications, we are constantly we're constantly having a go at certain elements in the property industry that are holding back any progress on the National Construction Code. And we name them, we don't mind. There's certain people that are in that, we've got nothing to lose by pointing them out, because, we want to be on the right side of history, I suppose, and there's a lot of other people with us. So that gives us strength.
Great.
Indeed.
I need to, I think we're 2 minutes from our 5 o'clock cutoff. So I just wanted to say, I could listen to this for another hour or so, I think, because it's been really interesting. And in some ways, I think, it sounded a little off topic, perhaps for many architects, but I think it's been totally on topic and so useful. And I'm really thrilled to see the, that we've already made a really important connection here, I think, between Martha and Tina. Tina is a gateway to thousands of professionals, or hundreds of thousands probably in Australia, that are decision makers. So I'm really excited by that outcome. I'm actually wondering, Tina, just from a point of view, because when I visit the Fifth Estate as an Australian, I'm quite interested but there's sort of a lot of topics that would be really useful to architects all over the world, but it's kind of embedded in a lot of very local issues as well. Maybe you need another section, which is just where you extract ones that are really universal, so that visitors from overseas maybe can cut to the, the less local issues. For the Fifth Estate, because I'm just thinking I'd really, love to hear the Martha's articles and things that you got.
Exactly, yeah. No, that's a great idea, and I think a lot of the things are universal, and we couch it in local terms because most news is local. But we have a UK correspondent, David Thorpe, who writes quite a lot about these universal things, and yes, I need another 10 journalists.
No, I thought it maybe just like filtering like a tag on certain articles where you think, this one's particularly Sydney or like local government in Australia, but this article is suited to a pretty broad audience, and you could sort of just filter them into a section in that way.
That's a great idea. I love it. Because we've got about 20% of our readers are actually global.
Yes, I would think so. And I really think you're quite unique, your site. I haven't seen another like it where it's such kind of fresh journalism about topics that are really relevant to the built environment. Yeah.
That's very kind of you. Thanks.
So fantastic. So thank you very much, both of you, and to Carlos as well for linking all the themes together. We'll have our next Declares and Shares in around 2 months. So I would love our speakers to always come back and take part as well. Yeah, I think if either of you have a follow-up topic that you would like to share or just test out as a presentation, Declares and Shares, we're always looking to grow our family and to have repeat speakers or different dialogues. So wonderful. Thank you very much. I hope everyone in the attending, the participants, have all enjoyed the talk as well. And we'll see you in 2 months. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.